You're listening to the Historical Movies Podcast. In today's episode, the rest of America don't mean a damn thing. You're in Mississippi now. It's Mississippi Burning. My name's Ross. I'm an editor, and I'm joined by a proper good old boy, my brother Bryce, Professor of Modern History at Liverpool Hope University and historical scriptwriter. Bryce, how are you doing?
How you doing, boy? Yes, I'm good. I'm good.
And we're down in the south for this one, Mississippi Burning. So coming up, we're going to talk about some of the real history, some of the many controversies surrounding this movie, Bryce. We're also going to run through our favourite scenes, our favourite actors and so on that appear in this movie. But first of all, I'm delighted to say that for the first time on the podcast, we're doing a Gene Hackman movie. We had to put together an emergency Hackman pod, didn't we? Slightly late. Since the demise of the great Gene, whose death, every time I read about it, just gets sadder and sadder. But we're not going to dwell on that. We're going to dwell on this movie in which he stars. For me, Bryce, Gene Hackman, always just a brilliant actor, one of my favourite actors. He would appear on my Mount Rushmore of actors, you know, the top 4 actors for me of all time. How about you?
Yes, well, of course, I think he's a great actor. I think, like a lot of the best actors, he came to fame a little bit later in life, and that probably shows there's a sort of, you know, kind of maturity to his performances, and I think, you know, sort of personal life as well, you know, not the sort of Hollywood brat. And yes, we did have to organise this emergency pod.
Late emergency
pod after the bizarre and intriguing death of Gene Hackman. I haven't actually looked at the latest theories on what actually happened in his sad death there, but I was reading the Spanish newspaper El País the week after he sadly dies, which was slightly less referential than some of the sort of English news commentary. I was reading an article where a guy basically said this is possibly his greatest role yet, his tragic and brilliant death.
What?
Which I thought was a bit
bloody hell,
a bit close to the bone. But
yeah, well, that's into the bone. That's not close to the bone. That's pretty horrific, isn't it?
But he's a great. I think it was meant in the best spirit. I think maybe it's lost in translation.
Okay, maybe. Yeah,
he's a great actor.
He's wonderful. For me, I think in this movie, he's got to be the best angry actor of all time, hasn't he? Angry Hackman, or maybe I should say controlled aggression Hackman, because he's just like one of the 7 wonders of acting when he's in the mode he is in often in this movie, which is this kind of menacing and then also charming, just absolutely wonderful. I'm thinking rapidly, are there any other historical movies in which he appears, which we could verifiably do on this podcast? Behind Enemy Lines is based loosely on a downed pilot in America. So maybe, hopefully, we'll get back to Hackman. But he is, I think, absolutely fantastic in this movie, as is a lot of the other cast. We should then get onto the history. So this is basically loosely based on the death of 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi in June 1964. James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. Were all parts of a campaign to register African-American voters in Mississippi. And they were abducted and murdered by the KKK. We see that at the beginning of this movie, Bryce, as it opens. And their bodies were discovered 44 days later in a nearby earthen dam. So I think this movie came in for a lot of critical acclaim. It's Roger Ebert, the American critic who we both like a lot. It was his pick for Best Film of 1988. But there were a lot of controversies on the other side, insofar as that it basically painted the white FBI agents as solving the racial crisis in America in the 60s in the South. Give us some background on that.
Oh, well, like I say, the context, it's 64. This is these you know, brave and tragic individuals are part of 800 Northern volunteers who came down to help with large-scale voter registration and so-called free schools. What the Mississippians termed an invasion.
Yes, sir.
The accuracy, I think there were some issues around this. All 3 victims were actually first taken to jail and then shot after their release, I believe, which is different to what's portrayed here. Okay, let's go straight to that issue of the sort of white saviour narrative. I did read a really interesting piece by one of the civil rights veterans who was part of this invasion, a guy called Michael Yarrow, writing in the Appalachian Journal. He says, and I quote, "I'm troubled by the disempowering version of history the film presents, in which the only significant historical actors are violent white males, in this case the Klan and the FBI." And I can see where he's coming from there, because it speaks to the fact that, you know, really the heroes of that story are the, thousands of largely anonymous people, largely black people in Mississippi, and those helping out from the north, tiny acts of resistance, the civil rights activists whose brave stance would, I suppose, later bleed into the anti-Vietnam protests a little bit later on. And I do get the criticism when we look at that context.
Yeah, I think the controversy surrounding, there's a lot of controversy surrounding this movie when it came out, and as far as I can tell, it was based on three things. One, that you've mentioned, that the FBI are basically elevated to heroes, white savior heroes, despite the fact that they were also in the 60s actively undermining a lot of civil rights movements. They had extensive surveillance on civil rights activists like Martin Luther King and so on. But the second point is that it ignores, in many ways, this is the most interesting thing for me reading about it, it ignores the civil rights movement at the center of what this movie is about. It doesn't explain the voter registration activities at the core of the movement that stirred up all of this racial hatred in Mississippi in the 1960s. We didn't get any of that. I mean, okay, that's not what this film is about. I understand that. This film is not a buddy cop movie, but you've got Gene Hackman, who's a good old boy, and then you've got Willem Dafoe, who's like this new-faced RFK brought in FBI, New World America from the North, coming down to try and solve these problems. And it works, I think, fantastically well as that movie. Really, really intriguing, really well acted. But then you've got this bizarre horror thing where it's very accurate in some points, very inaccurate in some points, and you think, well, why have they done that if they don't want to stir up all of this controversy? Well, sorry, I should say the third thing obviously the third point is that the depiction of the black community is passive in this movie. I've got a great quote by Barbara Reynolds, a columnist, an African-American columnist for USA Today. She says, "In Mississippi Burning, blacks mostly pray, hide, and sing, which could cause generations of young people to think blacks were hiding or sleeping under a magnolia bush while human rights battles roared around them."
Yeah.
So they don't do, there's no real black characters in this movie. They don't do anything in this movie.
Well, this is one of the great conundrums of how we teach history and how we learn about history, isn't it? I mean, how do you effectively give voice to, historically disempowered groups of people, be that women, people of colour, etc., etc.? I think specifically in this movie, it tells us, doesn't it, how deeply these issues run in the US and continue to run. I think underlying this is the notion that the FBI can't be the good guys because they're they are effectively part of the racist state apparatus, by which I mean the federal state, not the even more racist state of Mississippi. And I get that because, look, here, I watch, as an Irish historian, when I watch some fictional representations of the Northern Ireland conflict, for example, where, this sort of simplistic idea that the sort of British security forces are portrayed as the sort of neutral arbiter between these inevitably warring tribes, which of course ignores the fact that the reality of collusion and the dirty war, etc. At the same time, I have to say, does that mean that depicting individuals within the FBI, as in this movie, or MI6 for that matter, in a positive light is then an impossibility? Well, I think, of course not. So I don't really I can totally understand why people who are involved in that struggle and of that community had issues with this movie. But as a story, as you say, about effectively, okay, white saviours, but, they are a couple of good FBI men. Is that an impossibility? Of course not. And, I'd go back to the guy I quoted, Michael Yarrow, the civil rights activist, who did criticise that whole white saviour thing. The idea that it's only the violent white men can be the ones who sort anything out or drive anything forward in any kind of way. On the other hand, in the same piece, he also says he does believe that the massive, and I quote again, the massive presence of FBI and Navy personnel did intimidate the racists. And that is as well part of the historical fact.
Maybe then it's a question of balance. Maybe it's the fact that there's really no balance afforded to the communities which are most affected by this. That they're not representative at all. We keep coming back to this question. I know in this podcast we should rename the podcast to something more fitting, like did they go too far or something. But it's basically, this film, I think, works brilliantly as a drama film, not as like a historical film. And I also have a theory about that on some level, because I first saw this movie in secondary school in England. It must have been the late 90s or early 2000s. And I think these kind of movies were kind of doing the rounds in secondary schools at that time with Mr. Stevenson, the English teacher, who I believe you also had, Bryce, who was a bit of a lovey, bit of a soak, who cried at the end of Mice and Men, much to the ridicule of the class, unfortunately, poor man. But I was thinking, is this kind of like a bit of a kind of, we're talking about an era in the late 80s this was made. Is this a bit kind of like a Lovey's little bit ham-fisted attempt to do a bit of history, but in that good dramatical sense? Do you know what I'm trying to get at here?
Even more advice and criticism would be that this is a vehicle to make your sort of white upper middle class feel that everything's okay in the world, and that they bear no responsibility for this. And I'm speaking especially about northern and northeastern American audience. In terms of, okay, things were bad, but sure, as I think Dafoe says at one point to Gene Hackman's character, what's wrong with these people? And it's a kind of a way of letting them off the hook, if you see what I mean. It's the upper classes, it's the liberal sort of upper middle classes being let off the hook in some ways, but in this kind of movie, perhaps.
I think when dear old Steve-O was showing this, I did feel some kind of middle class angst coming out of him. So I think that's you
sweating
the nail on the head
out of
there.
him. Yeah.
Yes, it's a very large man, wasn't he? Yeah.
He liked to tipple.
He did. So as I mentioned in this movie, it does fascinate me because there's so much of this that they, Mississippi Burning, the name comes from the FBI case name. It's true that the FBI brought in, I don't know if it's hundreds, but many, many agents. The case, the bureaucratic case had 150,000 pages of documents on this. The naval reserves were drafted in. There's a lot of this stuff that is accurate. At least Gene Hackman's character is based on a real FBI agent in some part. Right. But then you just get some bizarre inaccuracies, like they've changed the name of the county from Neshoba County to Jessup County. I'm not really following their thought about what to keep in and what to exclude. You see what I mean? They talk about the FBI tactics, when you get the FBI badasses at the end, which is great cinema, really, really good fun. But that's not accurate. The biggest FBI breakthrough in this case, so I understand, came from an informant within the Ku Klux Klan who was paid $30,000 for his information. Now, obviously, that doesn't make a great film.
Yeah, and
but how much of the truth are you going to?
It's a perennial debate here, isn't it? And I once again, I would say a work of art need not bear 100% accuracy to real life. Another point we've discussed on this pod before is are these liberties acceptable if they increase the conversation around this as a piece of public history? So what I'd like to do now is actually an exercise where I'm going to send to you live on air now via WhatsApp a graph. We haven't done this before. I'm sending it to you now.
Wow.
Have you received that there?
Coming over.
Listeners, this is unprecedented.
Well, for an audio-only podcast, this is gold, Bryce. This is gold.
Graph illustrating from 1964 to 2008 the number of articles mentioning these murders down in Mississippi in the New York Times. And have you received that graph?
I received and understood.
And do you note that there is a massive, and I mean massive, spike in 1989?
It's turned into a court case. Yeah, in 1964 there was 61 number of articles. Yeah. In 1980,
that's the year that it happened. For goodness' sake,
yeah.
So this is 1989 when the film is released. We're up to, I think it's 170. So
Yeah.
the point, and actually, sorry, I should attribute this because we're not into plagiarism on this pod. This is a graph
Never.
put together by Claire Whitlinger in a piece in the Sociological Forum, and we're going to return to Dr. Whitlinger. She occupies Pseuds Corner for me.
Okay.
But you see the point though there. I mean, there's a spike in consciousness and mentions and historical memory around this, jolted by the movie. And so
Jolted by the movie. And sorry, just to explain this, yes, we are orderly talking through a graph and a podcast. And yes, we don't apologise for that. Not only did it have a spike in 88 or 89, Bryce, it seems to have kept going relatively regularly up until 2008 that people are bringing out. And before that, there's hardly anything before that up until the mid to late 60s. So there's a whole, in the 70s and early 80s, virtually nothing.
Yeah. And it, that I suppose answers your question about whether these liberties are acceptable.
Yeah, well, it is always kind of the get out clause, isn't it? Very often when people, dear old Mel, we love a bit of Mel Gibson on this podcast, but he does sometimes, very often says, either rightly or wrongly, exactly what you said about, well, if it raises awareness, if it gets people to pick up a book. And I sometimes think, yes, that's right. And I sometimes think, well, that's just bullshit to a bit of a cop-out.
Yeah, it's a get-out clause, yeah, sure. But, it is an argument there. And, you can't, I think as well, look, we always mention Mel, I think he said, look, if you were to make things 100% accurate, you'd have two and a half hours of very boring cinema. And, there's got to be that give and take there. And I can understand why people criticise this movie. I can understand why people from the black community in the South, people in the civil rights movement criticise it. I get that. But in another way, I hope that graph, this is great, isn't it? Live graph analysis illustrates how, despite those concerns,
the audio book of a graph,
it gets people talking. And that's important in terms of historical memory, isn't it? Which then, of course, has an impact politically. So, yeah.
Yeah, these things are like tumbleweeds, aren't they? You have to get them started.
Well, it mirrors the very slow start of this movie. To go back to the movie itself, actually, I found like the start of this movie incredibly slow. And it probably reflects the fact that it starts off, there's a burning building, there's the credits, then we have a very slow moving couple of cars and a pickup truck, and it's slow. And it's flagging that, yes, folks, we are in the deep south, or should I say yes'em. We are in the deep south. It's different here. The pace of life is slower. It's hot. It's sweaty.
Yeah, it's hot.
It's full of agitated
It's very,
men.
very hot.
It's, full of angry men with puddles of sweat under their armpits. Like a Tennessee Williams. If you watch Tennessee Williams play, it's sort of hot and clammy. There are crickets singing. And it's, the first we hear from Gene Hackman is a racist ditty. It's dusty, It's backwards, and above all, it's hot. And did I mention that it's hot?
Yes. There's some, this film, watching this when I was a kid, actually, and for many years afterwards, I really wanted to be one of the FBI guys in this. I think it does give an absolutely, elevating the FBI to heroes. And even when I was watching this movie again, I have seen it several times in between, but 20 odd years later from the first time, or actually 25, forget how old I am, from the first time I saw it, I just find the FBI agents in this so cool with their brow line glasses, thin ties, eating sandwiches on the go with endless supplies of coffee. I actually stopped and made myself a sandwich and a cup of coffee while I was watching this.
Well, it's a bit like you've mentioned Twin Peaks before, and I'm currently watching the last Twin Peaks after the death of David Lynch, and it's a bit like when you first see Agent Cooper in Twin Peaks and he's guzzling coffee and eating cake, and he's so cool in his black suit. And I mean, look, come back to that criticism of I mentioned the civil rights activist Michael Yarrow, like the idea that only violent white men can achieve anything. Well, and there's another criticism I read. It was like, okay, so many white heroes. Where are the she-ros? Okay, look.
Well, Frances McDormand is a strong character in this movie.
Yes, didn't she win an Oscar?
I think she's for this nominated. She's won 3, isn't she? She's one of Meryl Streep, and I think there's another.
Okay, but my point
actress
here is, and recognizing, of course, the sexism, racism at play, sure, but actually, again, talking about historical accuracy, at this time with a disempowered black community, etc., etc. Well, actually, yes, it probably was violent white men who got things done, for better and worse, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, there's no kind of... I think sometimes we can be a little bit too demanding in terms of trying to bring that narrative up to modern standards. At the time, unfortunately, with a vastly disempowered swathe of population, it was violent white guys, and in many respects, yeah, the FBI were the villains, but also occasionally heroes. You know, I've no problem with that.
So I wanted to come on and also mention the soundtrack, which was done by Trevor Jones, who we talked about on the Last of the Mohicans episode. I think it does a great job. The music that he's written does a great job of... You talked about this kind of Dust Bowl, muggy, almost like claustrophobically hot environment that this film creates, and the soundtrack has this driving rhythm through most of it, which creates this sense of we're on a case, we're getting shit done. You know, that kind of driving sense of this film, I think, works really well. What I find a little bit hackneyed, shall I say, Hackman-nut is the gospel music. Every time we see, you know, black people getting beaten or something, it's kind of like, I don't know how did it sit with you? For me, it was just like, I understand what they're doing, but this seems like, you know, the director, Sir Alan Parker, looks like a white middle class guy. What he think we should be seeing when we talk about
80s era. I think what's that? To bring it back to Mel again. To bring it back to racial politics. There's that great parody of Lethal Weapon. Is it called Loaded Weapon? One of the greatest comedy films of all time. Well, when you have the black cop, we have exaggerated saxophone music playing, and then when we see the white cop, you have this like aggressive like guitar music.
Well, yeah, but that comes from Lethal Weapon, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know, but that's what I mean. This is of that time where, you know, you look at it now and you think, oh, for goodness sake, laying it on a bit thick here. But that was part and parcel of the piece, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. So, shall we get on to our questions?
Yes.
Right? Oh, no, actually, sorry, I wanted to ask you a question about... I don't want to turn this podcast into let's talk about our distant family members in every episode, but we do have a relative, maybe a distant relative in America who busted some ass, some KKK
he's an Irish-American
guys by hiding in...
Yeah, he's up in... where is he? Up in... he's up in the north west, isn't he, somewhere? And he busted the KKK with taking their number plates down. Was that it? What year is this? Do you know? 90s. Would it be? I think
in the 90s.
I think, yeah.
And he.
This is very boring for our listeners when we just keep going into like spurious family anecdotes.
Who do you think you are? Yeah, but he hid in the bush. Basically, I don't know what is. I can't remember. He's some legal guy, isn't it? He hid in the bush, took down the KKK number plates at a meeting, and then busted their ass for tax evasion or something. Or have I got that very wrong?
Maybe like all their number, because you know in America, like you always see this movie, they could sort of have stuff written all over their number plates. So maybe they had, you know, stuff like KKK.
Well, yeah, as the businessman who at one point, you know, the Grand Dragon at one point, you know, is basically trying to not show he's part of the KKK, and then later we see him bombing around in his car with a bumper sticker that's got the Confederate flag and the phrase "Don't mix" on it, and I'm thinking, well, that's not very subtle, is it?
But, you know, wizards and wizards and dragons and wearing bedcloths over your head. What a bunch of fucking idiots. And you know, we should go on to mention, I think, companion movies, but I have a different one for companion movies, but it immediately brings to mind Black Klansman, which is a sort of comic tragic kind of more comedy by Spike Lee.
Spike Lee, I think, was very critical of this film.
Yeah, but Spike Lee is critical of everything. I have to. I'm not denying his certain genius, Spike Lee, but he is pretty much a self-appointed spokesman for anything African American, and he criticises absolutely everything that he doesn't make. I've got to get that point in there. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Time for a very short interruption. It's Ross here. Thanks very much for listening on YouTube. Don't forget to check out all of our other episodes, and we'd love to hear from you, so leave us a comment. And any sharing or liking or subscribing you can do would really help the podcast. So thanks a lot. So we'll move on to our questions that we ask of every movie. To this week's Trivial Trivia, Bryce. Gene Hackman's character, Rupert Anderson, wears the same pair of suspenders throughout the entire film. I don't know what that means. I don't know whether that means it's a costume department failure that he didn't. Look, Gene Hackman literally wore the same suspenders.
How's that a failing?
Or the person who's written this trivia.
Why wouldn't he wear?
I don't know. This is the point of trivial trivia. I don't know what that means.
Like sexy stockings and suspenders. You mean like sort of old man suspenders? Like what?
He may have been wearing that under his pleated.
But why is that a failing that he wears the same? Wouldn't it be more of a failing if his suspenders changed colour?
No. Well, exactly. Yeah, but it's not a failing. It's just trivial.
Okay, but I don't get it. It's not Zulu with the wristwatch, is it? I mean,
no.
Yeah, go on.
No, but it's just trivial.
Okay,
it doesn't add anything to it.
Certainly is trivial. Yeah.
Too long, too short. I think this was about the right length for me. What about you? This movie.
Yeah,
there's a good build-up of tension throughout, and then you get a fairly good kind of release. I don't like the last scene. We'll come on to that at the end, the very last scene. But I think it's a good kind of. It's just shy of 2 hours. I think it works very well. Who is your favourite character or performance? Is it going to be Hackman for you?
Of course, Gene Hackman, who was of California / Illinois, and yet who is entirely convincing as a Mississippian. Yeah,
brilliant. Also, I think Willem Dafoe is great in this movie. I think he made this after Platoon, didn't he? So he wasn't too well known.
Yes, sir.
And I suppose it's quite a difficult role to go up against Hackman on screen, but I think they work great, don't they? As the sort of buddy cops.
Yeah, I think they do. And again, I know that's the central criticism of this as a white savior piece, but it is that kind of movie, like we've discussed. Of that era, and for that sort of subgenre, it definitely works. They work well. The chemistry between them two, I think, is pretty good.
I think it basically this movie pitches on the chemistry between them. We've got Frances McDormand, who was nominated, I think, for an Oscar, and I was delighted to see Ali Ermey in this. The sergeant, the drill sergeant, more famously played the drill sergeant in. I am legally obliged to mention a Kubrick film in every episode. In Full Metal Jacket. You got your ass so far up my nose, I can feel your boots on my chin, as he says at one point, or words to those effects. I also have to give a shout out to Michael Rooker, who's the guy who's the 100% batshit crazy racist, who's just no filter on him at all. The bit where the guy who's nuts, Gene Hackman grabs.
And I grabs him by the balls.
Grabs the nut grab, the Hackman-nut-grab, which maybe
in their social club, social club where
but my favorite quote from Michael Rooker, who's just crazy in this movie, is he says, "They ain't never going to find those civil rightsers."
Civil rightsers.
That's what he calls them. Civil rightsers.
Well, I mean, look, there's no doubt in that we talked many times before, haven't we? Hollywood's goodies, baddies, black and white. I mean, there's no doubt here with that character you described there. I mean, have you got your bleeping device with you? Because the first words we hear from himself, from a cop, which is himself, of course, in the movie, are
that's going to involve a lot of bleeps.
I mean, it's like it's full on, isn't it? He's sitting up there in DC, laughing at us Mississippi folks, and quite right too, bunch of boneheads.
I also want to mention Tobin Bell, who plays in the Jigsaw movies. I think he's most famous, but he always pops up in movies. The guy he's got a very stark looking face with very bright blue eyes. He plays one of the badass FBI agents in this. Look him up if you don't know his face. You recognise him. It's his first credited role. So, what about your favourite scene? The beginning scene was described that you said was a bit slow, and I would agree with you. Barry Norman, do you remember Barry Norman, the film critic who used to write in that venerated organ, the Radio Times, described it as pure cinema. He liked it very much. But what was your favourite scene, Bryce?
I think without a shadow of a doubt, and maybe call me a fan of violent white men, but the social club scene where he just grabs your man by the knackers and keeps squeezing is very satisfying to see, isn't it? It's very satisfying to see this.
Now listen here, you shit kicker.
This horrid bigot, yeah.
We mentioned you mentioned Lethal Weapon, isn't it? Lethal Weapon 2, when the baddies are racist white South Africans. I always think they're a great baddie. You can't get it's always a great baddie to go up against the racist white KKK members. So you're always going to get a great payoff when you've got angry Hackman grabbing Michael Rooker's nuts under the table.
If you have racist white Protestants as your baddies, that you can't go far wrong. You really can't. As is proved in this movie, when your man reels off the list of all the people they don't like. Catholics, Jews,
I wanted to
blacks.
bring that up.
Yeah. Go on.
Like that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think you're only left with about 4% of the world's population.
Well, but that's the point, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway.
So that I think basically any scene in this, the Hackman and Dafoe scenes work fantastically well. I also enjoyed, although it's kind of ridiculous, the FBI. When they're entrapping people, stage kidnapping, that kind of stuff. Cinematically, it's fun. It works well. It's kind of a bit ridiculous. And I enjoyed I'm always a fan of the still frame at the end with, like Judge John G. Riley received suspended sentence, like this kind of thing. Next character, like good old boy Jim Hicks, jailed for 9 years.
Sentenced to 12 days in the penitentiary. For murder, yeah.
I always enjoy those scenes, but I think I will have to go for the Hackman-nut-grab as my favourite, which is it's such a payoff. I didn't like I think the end scene though, when you've got this, I'm not sure if I'm thinking about it too much or what, but you've got basically a mixed race choir singing next to a burnt church, and then Dafoe says, "Do you want to drive, Rupert?" Hackman's character, is he basically saying, you're right, when we go in for these FBI investigations, we've got to play nasty to nail these guys. And then, like the mixed race choir, is that like we've sorted it out? Is that like the racial harmony in the sound? Do you know what I mean? It's a kind of a weird scene.
Yeah, I think you're maybe thinking a little bit too deeply about it, because it's like, as you say, it's of that kind of late 80s, in some ways like self-satisfied white liberal consciousness type movie, and it's I hate to say this as an excuse for racism, etc. It is of its time
in the late 80s. Those kind of shots, those kind of scenes. My favorite shot, which I sometimes bring up in this podcast, I think there's a great shot of when they're escorting the kid who's wearing the cardboard box on his head in the car, and there's a shot of it's obviously taken from a car in front of that, and the shot is looking back at this car, and it's kind of slaloming in front of this car, and then you've got this pacing kind of music in the background. Gives a great kind of, it's basically the feeling of the whole movie that they create, that they're sort of not welcome here, that everyone's suspicious of them. It's a great shot, actually.
Well, I actually have to say, look, in the interest of balance, we know who the baddies are here, but I think, contextually as well, you got to remember, contextually, we could go back to the American Civil War to explain the dislike of feds in that part of the world. And, you have to say, in defense of, there is a certain charm to some of these bigots, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. Sugar mentality. No, there is. I mean, and it comes back. There's a deep historical point here, and I won't follow this up too much. But like studies, for example, of Nazi Germany. To what extent are the population at large complicit? It comes back to the famous book Hitler's Willing Executioners by Daniel Goldhagen, which just blames all of the Germans. Or do you blame the institutions? There's a big question mark there. I can't help but be repulsed, yes, but at the same time charmed by the Deep South in some ways.
You mean the culture of the Deep South?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a definitely like, and that's the whole point, isn't it? With your man Hackman's character, so he sort of gets it, right?
Yeah,
and that's the key here. Anyway, sorry, we're going off on one there.
It's a good point, but I also wanted to mention there's a few scenes in this where they've got interviews interspersed during the investigation, and those are they're not actors, they're real local residents, and apparently the director Alan Parker, when he was filming it, he just gave them one or two pointers and said just ad-lib it, and he wasn't sure. Because they work very well in this movie. He wasn't sure, okay, but just interviewed a lot of racists, quite possibly.
Are they genuine interviews?
They're real interviews with they're not actors. Then they're real interviews with local people that they'd said, "Can you do this?"
That I thought they were. I couldn't actually. I wasn't sure whether they were real or not. I actually really liked that. And
it's good.
And it does show
good mixing of styles.
that people are not, inherently bad. If you're brought up to believe that, in a literal reading of the Bible, that it justifies slavery in Genesis 9:27, as Francis McDormand cites, and that is, may Canaan be the slave of Japheth. That all of this is sanctioned by your holy book. You can begin to perhaps step into the mentality of these assholes.
Yeah. Most important question, Bryce. Which part should Mel Gibson have played?
Once again, with this question, I always say the lead kick-ass role, isn't it? It's the Gene Hackman role. It's grabbing balls.
Yeah, I'm expanding this now to include which part should Mel Gibson, Daniel Day-Lewis, or Marlon Brando have played in this movie?
Same answer.
Do we get a? I think Beached Whale era Brando might have played the racist sheriff quite well. You're in Mississippi now, boy.
He could well have done, yeah. Which brings me on, if I may, preempt the companion movie.
Yes, please.
And there's a clear precedent to this movie, and in a way, it's a better movie. Which is In the Heat of the Night
with Sidney
Poitier.
Yeah, great film. Yeah,
where you've got Saviour Lawmen, one white, one black in this case.
Yeah.
But it's in the South. It's hot. It's sticky. It's in some ways it's actually, I have to say, it's a better movie than this.
I've got Cry Freedom. Superfan Jack, if you're listening, I know you listen to every episode. We will get around to doing that at some point. You asked me to do that question, but that's also be a film. I bring that up because I know it's set in apartheid South Africa, but that also sparked controversy. White savior motives, yada yada yada. I think though, for angry, you could have an angry Hackman triple header. You've got French Connection, Mississippi Burning, Crimson Tide.
Yeah. Angry.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Angry Hackman. There's also a
Hacked off Hackman.
Yeah. There's also a made-for-television drama film called Freedom Song, starring Danny Glover, which I understand gives a much better historical view of the civil rights movement in Mississippi in the 60s. So if you want
but who's seen that? Yeah.
If you want to watch, I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's any good, but I feel we should mention that, and if people listening would like to see something more historically accurate. What would happen? What are we putting in our Hall of Fame, Bryce?
The Fiery Cross.
That's what I've got. I've got the giant burning cross.
Okay, next question.
Yep, great. I've got a question about that though. In the Nobel Prize for Movie Physics, first of all, the KKK, when they petrol bomb houses, it's the scene just before the naval reserves come in, the houses, they literally blow to smithereens. And I don't mean just like the sort of typical movie explosion. There's a shot of a house, which is in the trailer for this movie as well, that it's like those shots in Independence Day of the White House blowing up. It is like it's atomized by a petrol bomb. How does that happen?
Well, it could have. Maybe there was a propane tank out back. I don't know.
Okay, what would happen in the sequel if there was one? Mississippi Rising. I've got the name, but I don't really know what that means. Maybe it's like the civil rights movement.
White racist secessionist movement, Second Civil War. Well, what would happen in a nice sequel would be the fact that many years on there's finally a black president. Which is, when you view movies like this, without wanting to sound too much like a bleeding heart, it is remarkable. Yeah. It really is.
Well, the first shot on this movie is those segregated drinking fountains, isn't it? And you think, Jesus, this is set in 1964. You kind of forget how recent that's really, really recent, really, if you think about what's going on in this movie. Yeah. What have you got for Pseuds Corner then, Bryce? I'm eagerly awaiting.
Pseuds Corner live on air. I'm now WhatsApping you.
Oh, another WhatsApp.
And I'd like you to describe this because I sent you before, I thought, a really good graph illustrating a point by Claire Whitlinger in the Sociological Forum, which she then ruins by including an utterly incomprehensible, in inverted commas, map of the collective memory of the 1964 murders. Which I think really captures some of the pretentious nonsense masquerading as, data-driven analysis in some sort of sociology / memory studies approaches. I mean, look at what you described this, which I've just sent to you.
It's pretty much indescribable. It looks like, actually, when you send it to me, it looks like a family tree with names, and they're attached by lines.
It's like a big spider.
What did you say? Yeah, it's completely...
It's a map of the historical memory of the 64 murders.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I know what historical memory means, but I mean, this there's various different points on this. You've got murder, civil silence, pen mayor, move, resources. It's like, I don't know, it's like a sort of... mind map. I don't know why she's included. I don't understand what it means.
I'll put it on, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put it on there because it's indescribable in many ways in audio form. I also note, Bryce, it's page 654.
Of that journal, to be fair.
Of the journal,
it's not a book that is that long. But it is shite. Right.
So that's a very good visual Pseuds Corner, first time ever. Pedant's Corner, the trumpet pitcher flower, clearly not a trumpet pitcher. A lot of people annoyed about that. It doesn't look anything like a trumpet pitcher, apparently. That's the flower that Gene Hackman gives.
Yes. Okay.
And one I picked up on, when the agents visit Deputy Pell's house in the evening, he's watching baseball on television. But in 1964, only afternoon games were televised on Saturday. I honestly did think when I was watching this, what game of baseball is on at like 9:30 in the evening in 1964?
Maybe the Negro Leagues. I mean, they did used to, of course, have the Negro Leagues. I don't know about the history of baseball.
Jesus.
Maybe they made them play at night. I don't know. After watching this, it's like anything's possible.
Okay, so I think we've covered everything. The only thing remaining is your coveted score out of 10, Bryce. What did you give Mississippi Burning?
I'm going to give it a 7.
A 7? I've given it an 8 as a film. I think it functions. I found it a very enjoyable film, and I think it functions really well. And I'm, as I mentioned at the top, massive Gene Hackman fan.
Sorry, 1951. So little correction. 1951 was the last Negro American League of Baseball.
Jesus.
Apologies.
Okay. Thanks for that live update. So that's it. That was Mississippi Burning. Bryce, thanks very much for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Get in contact with us at our email address, which is in the show notes or the description of this video. Yeah, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. That's it for this episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. Don't forget to leave us a review on your chosen podcast platform. Spotify and Apple Podcasts make a huge difference to the algorithm. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment or a like or subscribe. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.